Right. So get to say, we're diving into this idea of like finding freedom through fear.
Yeah.
Kind of a head scratcher, right?
This is a little bit. Yeah.
But we're talking about fear of God specifically.
Right.
And we're going deep into Michael Reeves' book, Rejoice and Tremble, to figure out what that actually means.
You know, it's interesting because so often when we hear that word fear, we immediately think of danger,
Right.
like running away or just feeling anxious.
Yeah.
But the kind of fear that Reeves is talking about when he talks about feeling God, it's not like that at
It's
all.
not about the like trembling in your boots kind of fear. More like a...
It's actually a source of joy
Okay.
and motivation, but I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense right off the bat.
Yeah. No, that's kind of what I was getting at, because even Reeves in his book, he starts out with this quote from Martin Luther.
Oh, yeah.
And it really throws you off.
Yeah.
He says, "To fear God is not merely to fall upon your knees. Even a godless man and a robber can do that." So clearly we're talking about something way more than just like outward actions, right?
Absolutely. It's so fascinating how the reformers, especially Luther, they were really pushing back against this idea that just going through the motions was enough.
Yeah.
Like just doing the things that you're supposed to do on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying that true fear of God, it's an inward change.
Okay.
It's about what's going on in your heart.
So not just like, going to church every Sunday and
Right.
saying your prayers.
Exactly.
It's got to be something deeper.
Yeah, it's about a heart transformation.
Okay, so then how do we even know, like, if we're talking about the right kind of fear?
Yeah.
Because Reeves, he brings up this guy, Thomas Boston,
Oh, yeah.
who makes this distinction between two different types of fear.
Right.
He calls them slavish fear and filial fear.
Yeah.
I don't know, those words themselves aren't super helpful.
They're not the most intuitive.
No.
So think about it like this. Imagine a kid who only cleans their room because they're terrified of being punished by their parents.
Okay.
That's kind of like slavish fear.
Right.
It's all about avoiding punishment.
Okay.
But then you have a child who cleans their room because they love their parents
Right.
and they want to make them happy.
Okay.
That's more like filial fear.
Gotcha.
It comes from a place of love and respect.
So in that analogy, like, slavish fear would be seeing God as this big, scary judge in the sky.
Right.
Who's just waiting to, like, zap you.
Exactly.
But filial fear is seeing God as a loving father who we want to please.
That's it.
Okay.
And it actually changes how we view everything. Like in Psalm 112.1, it says, "Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who greatly delights in his commandments."
So it's not about, like, begrudgingly following the rules.
No, it's not about just going through the motions. It's about our hearts truly wanting to follow God's ways.
Okay, so this filial fear, it's rooted in love.
Yeah.
And it changes our desires. How does that actually, like, play out in our lives, though?
Yeah.
Like, what does this dreading sin thing actually look like, on a random Tuesday afternoon when you've got a tough decision to make?
Well, think about a time when you were tempted to do something that you knew was wrong.
Okay.
Maybe you were thinking about lying to get out of trouble or gossiping about a friend.
Yeah.
If you have that filial fear, it's not just about the fear of getting caught.
Okay.
It's about this deeper sense of knowing that this action would grieve God because you love him.
Okay, that makes sense. But this whole thing about our hearts needing to change,
Yeah.
it reminds me of how Reeves talks about Luther and his issues with, like, some of the classical philosophers, because it sounds like they believed that you could just, like, fake it till you make it
Yeah.
when it comes to being a good person.
Yeah. Thinkers like Aristotle and Aquinas, they thought that you could develop virtue through practice, even if your heart wasn't fully in it. But Luther, he was totally against that. He was adamant that real change had to come from the inside out.
So you couldn't just, like, force yourself to do good deeds and expect your heart to catch up.
Right. He argued that sin goes way deeper than just our outward actions.
Okay.
It's about our deepest desires.
Okay.
And you can't just force yourself to do good things and expect your heart to magically follow.
But wait, doesn't that contradict the whole idea that we should be, like, actively reading our Bibles and going to church? I mean, those are good actions, right? Are those useless if our hearts aren't fully transformed yet?
Well, Luther would say that those things aren't about earning God's favor or magically transforming us from the outside in.
Okay.
He called them means of grace.
Means of grace.
Yeah, think of it like tending a garden.
Okay.
Reading the Bible is like watering the soil, giving your heart the nourishment that it needs to grow.
So it's not about just, like, going through the motions, but about actually engaging with these practices to cultivate that deeper transformation.
Exactly. And that's where the connection to the gospel comes in.
Hold on. I'm not sure I'm following how the gospel fits into all this.
Right.
We haven't really talked about that yet.
Right. So the gospel is the good news that, like, even though our hearts are kind of messed up and prone to sin, God still loves us anyway.
Oh.
You know? He sent his son, Jesus, to die for us so that we don't have to face the punishment we deserve.
Okay.
And when we really grasp that, it changes everything.
So you're saying that realizing how much God loves us, that's actually what leads to that filial fear.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this all connects now.
Okay, good.
It's not about us trying to, like, force ourselves to be afraid.
Right.
It's about letting that understanding of God's love kind of sink in and change us from the inside out.
Exactly. And as our hearts change, that fear, it just naturally follows.
God.
It's like, imagine you won $1 million from someone you barely knew.
Okay.
You'd probably be excited, but, like, your relationship with that person wouldn't really change that much. But what if your own parent sacrificed something incredibly precious to give you this life-changing gift?
Oh, wow.
That would not only make you grateful, but it would deepen your love and respect for them.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
You'd be a lot less likely to do something that would disappoint them or hurt them.
Exactly.
Because of what they did for you.
Right. It's not about walking on eggshells or anything.
Yeah.
It's about valuing that relationship so much that you don't want to damage it.
So that's where obedience comes in.
Exactly.
Right? With filial fear.
Yeah.
We're not obeying God just to avoid punishment.
Right.
It's a natural response to his love.
That's it. You delight in doing what pleases him because you're so thankful for what he's done for you.
Okay.
Remember that verse we talked about earlier from Psalm 112 about delighting in his commandments?
Yeah. Okay, I'm seeing it now.
That's what we're talking about.
So it's not fear versus joy.
Right.
It's fear and joy.
Yeah, both flowing from a heart that's been changed by the gospel.
Okay, that's really good.
And remember that transformation, it's a process.
Right.
Remember how Luther was talking about real change having to come from the inside out?
Yeah.
It's not about faking it or just going through the motions. It's about letting the gospel work on our hearts, softening them, and making us more receptive to God's love.
But how do we know if it's really working? We've talked about reading the Bible and going to church as means of grace.
Right.
But what if those things start to feel like just another set of rules or rituals?
Yeah.
Like, how do we keep our hearts engaged and avoid falling back into that slavish fear mentality?
I think the key is to remember that these practices, they're not magic formulas or anything.
Yeah.
They're tools to help us connect with God,
Right.
but it's our relationship with him that really matters.
You know what, that reminds me of something I used to think about going to church, like taking my car to the mechanic.
Oh, okay.
I'd show up, sit there passively while someone tinkered under the hood, and then expect everything to be magically fixed.
Yeah.
But that's not how it works with our hearts, is it?
Not really.
It's more like going to the gym.
Okay.
Just showing up and going through the motions won't get you in shape.
Right,
You
yeah.
got to actively engage, put in the effort, and then you'll start to see the results.
Exactly. So when you're reading the Bible, don't just skim the words.
Yeah.
Pause, reflect, ask yourself, what am I learning about God's character?
Okay.
How does this passage point to his love, his holiness, his justice? It's about letting the words sink in and really wrestling with them.
Okay. So it's about engaging with it,
Yeah.
really thinking about it.
Right.
And I guess the same goes for prayer, being part of a church community.
Absolutely.
It's not about checking boxes.
No?
It's about actively seeking that connection with God and with other believers.
Right.
It's about letting those relationships shape us and help us grow.
And that's where we see the beauty of the gospel at work.
Okay.
It's not about earning God's favor. It's about receiving his grace and letting it transform us. It's about knowing that even when we mess up, his love for us doesn't change.
That's so important because I think a lot of people, myself included, we struggle with feeling like we have to be perfect to earn God's love.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's not how it works at all.
No, not at all. It's his love that motivates us to want to live in a way that pleases him.
Right.
Right? And when we truly understand that, it takes away that pressure of having to be perfect.
Okay.
It allows us to approach God with humility and honesty,
Yeah.
knowing that he sees us flaws and all and still loves us unconditionally.
That's really good. This is really resonating with me. But there's still this one piece that I'm kind of struggling with.
Okay, what's that?
You mentioned earlier that through filial fear, we learn to dread sin itself, not just the punishment.
Right.
But honestly, sometimes I feel like I mess up so much
Yeah.
that I must be doing something wrong. Like if I truly feared God, wouldn't I be better at avoiding sin?
You know, that's a really common struggle.
Yeah.
And I think it actually highlights the difference between slavish fear and filial fear even more. Because with slavish fear, it's all about avoiding punishment, right?
Right.
So if you mess up, you think, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
But with filial fear, it's different.
Okay.
Think about it like this.
Good.
Let's say you have a friend who's incredibly generous and kind.
Uh-huh.
You value that friendship a lot.
Yeah.
But what if you did something that really hurt them?
Okay.
Betrayed their trust?
Hmm.
Would that mean you suddenly stopped valuing the friendship?
No, not at all.
Probably not, right?
If anything, it made you feel worse
Exactly.
because you hurt someone you cared about.
Right. And it's the same with God.
Okay.
When we truly have that filial fear, our sin, it grieves us, not just because we're afraid of punishment,
Okay.
but because we know we've hurt God who we love.
So it's like the more we understand God's love for us,
Yeah.
the more our sin hurts because we see how much it hurts him.
That's it.
Whoa,
It's
wow.
a different perspective.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
It makes me rethink those moments where I fall short.
And that's where the beauty of the gospel comes in again.
Okay.
We don't have to be paralyzed by that fear of messing up
Yeah.
because God's grace is bigger than our failures.
Okay.
He offers forgiveness, restoration, and the power to actually walk in a new way of life.
So even when we stumble,
Right.
this filial fear can actually be a source of comfort.
It can be. Yeah.
It's like knowing we have a loving Father who's always there to pick us up when we fall,
Exactly.
not to like yell at us or condemn us for making mistakes.
He's not waiting to zap us.
Right, exactly.
And you know what? That brings us to the heart of it all, doesn't it?
What's that?
The fear of God isn't ultimately about rules or rituals.
Okay.
It's about relationship. It's about knowing and loving the God who first loved us.
Right.
And out of that relationship flows everything else.
Okay.
Our worship, our obedience, our desire to live in a way that honors him.
So bringing this back around to our listeners,
Yeah.
if the gospel is really the key to this whole transformation thing,
Right.
how can we apply all this to our daily lives?
Yeah, it's a big question.
Like, what can we actually do to cultivate this filial fear and let this good news really sink in and shape everything we do?
Well, I think it starts with remembering that it's not about manufacturing fear.
Okay.
It's about opening our hearts to the truth of who God is
Right.
and what he's done for us.
Okay.
So carve out time for those means of grace we talked about. Reading the Bible, praying, being in community with other believers, but do it with intentionality, with this posture of humility
Okay.
and openness to what God might be trying to show you.
So it's not just about going through the motions.
Oh, right. It's about really engaging with it.
And remember, it's not about being perfect
Right.
or checking off boxes.
Exactly. It's about fostering that deeper relationship with God, letting his love and grace transform us from the inside out.
You know, sometimes I picture it like holding a cup under a waterfall. The water is God's grace constantly pouring out.
I like that.
We can choose to hold our cup upside down and let it all run off.
Right.
Or we can turn our cup upright and let it fill us up.
That's a great way to put it.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about.
Okay.
If truly knowing God is what cultivates filial fear
Yeah.
and leads to a life of joy and purpose, what can you do to open your heart wider to his grace? How can you turn your cup upright today?
That's a journey worth taking.
It really is.
Because when we truly grasp the wonder of God's grace, that's when the fear of God becomes not a burden,
Right.
but a source of immense joy, freedom, and purpose.
That's so good. Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
Yeah, this was great.